Good morning, everybody. Today we're going to go through the drawing one more time. I just put it up on the whiteboard again so that we can, a lot of times I'll have to adjust my dimensions, which I've already done, so that you don't have to go through all that again. Basically, I just refigured everything out again to make sure everything was good. I found some actual dimensions on my own sketch that weren't correct, so I've actually had to go back and correct it. And so if I've made a mistake along the way, it's not uncommon. You just, when you're doing the work just off sketches and stuff, it's not a formal drawing, you are going to have to make changes. And you want to double check everything you do every time you do it. For a variety of things. For size, so you don't waste stock. And then the other things for safety. Those are the two things. Once you've developed what it is, then it's just a matter of, okay, now I need a piece of 7 1/4 inch stock cut to 16 3/8. So when you go over to the saw, it's about getting the size correct and doing it safely. Not necessarily in that order. It's always, safety is first, always. So we are going to do a few things to go through a little bit of safety on the saw. But anyway, so we've gone through, like I say, I've redimensioned everything. If you notice, some of the dimensions on here don't look quite right, or not the same as the previous drawing. This is actually a pretty good drawing, and you can go off this, and I want you to draw this on a piece of paper. You should put this, leave this in your notebook, and you can come back and look at it or zoom in or whatever you need to do to go through this stuff. But I'll just go through a very brief thing about the sketch. So we know our width is going to be 7 1/4 wide. We're going to use a butt joint, so this letter B will butt into the side of letter A like this. Okay, so this is the up and down part, and this is the side part. So we know we're using a butt joint. Okay, and so anyway, for the bottom, it's going to be a 1/2 inch up off the very bottom of the wood and to the dado. Everybody knows what a dado. I've been through that extensively. And the dado is going to be 1/4 inch thick and 3/8 of an inch deep. We're going to have our 7 1/4 inch side. See, I've cut away the side right here, and that's what that is. So you can see the 7 1/4 inch side piece, which is letter B, and on top of that is letter C, which is the lid, which will go across the whole thing. Okay. And we're going to have a little space there, just for clearance. I use clearance a lot, and clearance is absolutely necessary, especially in the woodworking field. There's times when you have very little clearance, but it seems like there's always some clearance, especially with moving parts. So, so you have 3/16 clearance. I have 1.5 inches down, leaving 1 inch around for a 1 inch hole. We went through that and why we do that. And then the two dimensions are 8 3/16 to the top edge, and then we're going to go 8 3/16 to the very top. So 8 3/16 and 8 3/16, 16 3/8. Remember how we multiply our fractions. So 3/16 plus 3/16 is 3/8. And I said multiply them at addition. And this is just a brief overview, so I have to forgive me for some of these little errors. And then for letter B, 19 1/16 is going to be the width. We do that for stock and sizes as far as getting the most out of a piece of stock. And then letter D is just the dowel rod, 1 inch diameter. So then the cut list, we come over here, we'll need 2 A's made at this dimension, 2 B's at this dimension, 1 C, that's the lid right here. Sometimes I'll even just write lid off to the side, just for my own information. You won't see that on most really formal drawings. Letter D is a 1 inch diameter dowel. And I see diameter, I know it's going to be a dowel because it's a small project. If we're doing a really huge project, I'd probably write something down on that as well. And then letter E is the bottom size. The bottom size, I know that there's going to be there might be some changes on that, but this should be the right size. Using an 1/8 inch clearance again on each side. And then the piano hinge will be 18 inches long. Piano hinge is a piano hinge. We bought it, and it's the only hinge we're going to be using on the project again, so we don't have to be real specific with what that is. We could right at the end here, but this is going to be 3/4 lumber. LO is abbreviated like that. I go ditto, ditto. That's just a dowel. Sometimes I'll specify materials, whether it's birch or maple or yellow birch or yellow poplar, which is actually green. I don't know why they say that. And then the bottom's going to be 1/4 inch ply wood. And then the hinge is the hinge, like I say. They have all sorts of different size hinges, but again, in this application, we're just going to be using an 18-inch piano hinge. So, anyway, that is my brief overview of the dimensions. We'll soon be cutting. What I'm going to do now is I've already installed the battery in the back of the saw. Normally you plug them in, but this is just a little saw that I used in my shop for taking out the job sites. Actually, not in the shop, but to take out the job sites, because the saw only weighs about 30 pounds and it's extremely accurate. So I could use it for if I needed a small piece of trim or something, I could just bring it out to the job site. And I had a wired battery nailer. I use that for just a quick job. So if I had to go out and cut something quick, otherwise you want a nice power, like a 110 power instead of a battery. Usually works a lot better because it's got more power and they cut faster. But being in this environment here, I didn't think it was real necessary to cut a lot of pieces fast. So I just decided to go with the little battery saw for up here right now. Eventually we'll replace my saw with the school's old saw. We'll get a nice miter box. We'll get it in here and then we'll go from there. But anyway, one of the first things in regards to safety, you see this one's got this extra blade guard. Blade guards are incredibly important because people will reach in, they're measuring underneath the blade, and it's really dangerous to do that, especially with this huge exposed blade. And I know some carpenters that actually have removed this whole blade guard, so that whole blade is just sticking out in the middle of everything. That's a very dangerous way to use a saw, in my thinking. It actually retracts. See how it retracts as you go down? Makita's carefully designed this so almost only thing you get exposed is just where it's cutting. So it's really hard to get your fingers in there. So it's a well-designed safety feature. The other nice thing is they have radial arm saws that used to draw through the stock. Well, if the blade is turning this way, and the saws are probably very, very, very powerful, and probably 5 horsepower or more, you start drawing the material through, it would catch and rip it forward. And sometimes it would blow the stock out through the back of the fence, or it would jerk the stuff so hard it would pull your hand into the saw blade. Whereas now, the saw comes down and if the blade is spinning this way, you're pushing the stock back into the fence. So again, it's this type of saw where you can do that sliding compound miter is what this is. Some are just a chop saw where you just bring it down and chop it off. But that's what's the huge advantage to having this kind of saw is that you can draw it out and all the cutting force is directed into the fence. So it's a very safe saw. And the more powerful plug-in ones are just as safe. Most all the brands, now it's not Makita, but say you get a Bosch or a DeWalt, any of those brands almost all have this blade guard on them. So I would never buy an old saw because it doesn't have this blade guard. There's been a lot of guys that have just been reaching across for something and they end up hurting themselves really badly. Of course we're going to avoid that. So the next thing to do is to have a stand. The stand here, I don't know how much you can see, but the stand is almost as important as a saw because it's supporting the saw and it's securing the saw. So it supports the saw and the stock essentially, and it's securing the saw so it can't wiggle. I've got it bolted down. You're supposed to bolt every machine down that you can. If you can't bolt the machine down, you bolt or screw down the stock or clamp, and that'll hold the stock in place while you cut it. But one or the other, you can't have things moving around when you're doing this kind of thing. You want to either have your tool stationary or you want your workpiece stationary. That way you can use both your hands to hold the cutting tool or hold the stock. In this case, the saw the saw and the stand are supporting the stock, and I'm using my other hand to cut it. And then I'll hold it up against the fence. So everything is very, very secure. You always want to be secure when you're doing this kind of thing. So then the other thing to line this up, you push this all the way back, and you can do this ahead of time. So the support should be, see how it's actually coming down about an 1/8 inch? I'll just check the material for straight. And it's pretty good. I just flipped it over. It's still up a little bit. So I'm just going to adjust this one up a little bit. Oh, I think that's it. Yeah, this one was quite tight. That was part of it. That's the other thing, is you want to tighten everything down. Everything's got to be tight. You can have the best machine in the world, and if you don't have it tight, all your screws, it won't be working. Let's look at that. It's still down a little bit. You can have the best machines in the world, and if you don't tighten the screws down, it'll act just like a really bad tool. That's just about perfect there, I'd say. So, all right, I guess we're ready to start cutting. We'll just set this out of the way for now. So if you look at your cut list, what size stock are you going to use for the letter A? If memory serves me, we're going to use a 10-footer. And I'm pretty sure that's what it is because I've been through this many, many times now. So I'm going to grab a piece of 10-foot stock. The other thing that's a handy feature on here is it actually does have on here, this is a stop. So you just tilt it up like that and you run your stock up against it. The only problem with that right now is that I don't think I can get it close enough. And I cannot. But the stop is the best way to approach that, because if you use a stop, it will allow you to make an adjustment and then just have to measure it once. But now I'm going to have to cut, I'll cut one and then I got to measure again. Cut one and measure again. And when you use the stop, you cut once, you set the stop, and then you're done. Then you just keep running it up against stop, running up against stop. And stops can move. And so you just check it probably every 2 or 3 pieces you want to check. Sometimes every piece, depending upon the quality of your stand. But I've had really good luck just setting up stops. I learned that when I was a machinist. Stops are a mandatory thing. You got to set up stops every single time because they're looking for production in a machine shop. But for now, I'm just going to flip this over, and then we're going to start cutting. I build a pattern. I draw out the whole thing on the piece of wood, and then I have a design in my head usually on how I'm going to hold it and whatever. And so I will, these are like for punch holes again. We'll use the punch for that, locate holes. But what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to measure from the bottom to the top, make sure it's 16 3/8, and it is. So if I have just a little space on the board, I'll measure the whole board and say the board is 120 1/4. I will probably try to just leave a hair on the end so it actually will clean up. Otherwise, we'll have a little square spot where it didn't clean up, and I like my stuff to clean up. So if there's room on the board, I might add just a 30 seconds so it just has a little bit there to clean up. But so anyway, that's what the pattern is for, and we'll actually go through the pattern here in a step or two. So anyway, we'll go ahead and make that first cut. So I'm going to measure out 16 3/8. Actually, I was going to measure the whole length. And we do have just a little extra, so I'm going to probably leave maybe a 30-second. So I'll mark it at 16 3/8 and just a hair, or I'll mark it at 16 3/8 and just cut it a little bit long. Because the center of your mark should be where your cut is. So if I leave the whole mark, it leaves about a 30-second in there. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and make the cut now. So bring it over, get the blade lined up. It's pretty close. you take a little bit of a practice cut, and then you adjust anything you're going on. So I'm going to leave the whole mark because I want to leave just a hair on the end. And then see how I've got my thumb tucked? I got it like this. The other way to do it is like this, so your thumb is down. We went all through this on the safety procedures quite some time ago, so this is all a refresher. So as long as you keep your thumb tucked, you can see how I'm pushing against the stock with my hand. I'm pushing in and down, and that holds it up against there, and I'm able to hold it against the fence. You do the same kind of thing going with your thumb down, just like this. I never ever want to see your thumb sticking out. There's not a better way to cut off your fingers than to leave them stick out. Okay? So anyway, you hold it like that. Make a practice cut. It's just a tweak short. And so what I do is I actually run my finger right up against a solid piece of the saw. And I can actually run it up against here and I can feel just a little bit of change. Okay, I moved it just a tiny amount. Okay, there's one. So we'll do it again, 16 3/8. This is where accuracy is real important. You want to make sure that your measuring tools are very accurate. If they're not accurate, it can be really hard to build things because what happens is if one is shorter than the other, all of a sudden there's no room to clean up on the pattern. You have that little square spot I was talking about. The other thing to think about is if I used to be in charge of calibration at a place, and so the calibration on a machine shop's much more crucial, but it wasn't only a matter of yours was accurate, it was a matter of everybody's had to be accurate. So I would have to go through, and all the machinists own their own measuring tools, like micrometers and different things. So what I had to do was I made sure that everybody's micrometers were reading exactly the same. So if I had Tom go over and measure one of Mike's pieces, they should read it, their readings on their micrometer should be identical within a 10,000th of an inch. Now, obviously, we're not that accurate in this class. But a 30-second, we should be able to do a 30-second pretty good. But the problem is whether it's all going to fit in the pattern and not come out, so your tape measure may read exactly 16 3/8 in a 30-second, but somebody else's may not read exactly the same, might be a little shorter just because every tape measure is a little bit different and they're not to the extreme tolerances that machining is like in the metal field. But anyway, so that's something to pay attention to. That's why I wanted everybody to have a brand new tape measure this year. When you let it slap, I just do it, it bothers me just to do it like that. You should never let your tape measure slap because that accuracy goes away and all you got these two little tiny rivets here holding that tab on. See those little rivets? There's just these two little rivets holding that whole thing on there. And they're actually made to slip back and forth. And they go back and forth the amount of thickness. So if you push against something, it'll measure accurate, or if you pull, it's going to measure accurately. That's the thickness of this tab right here. Okay? And so if you let it slap repeatedly, eventually it's like a hammer hitting something. It will eventually break these rivets off or make them wear them out faster. So you want to make sure and not let your tape measure slap. You should, when you come in, it should be nice and easy. Just a little bit like that. It'll go forever that way. I've had tape measures for 5 and 10 years. Other times, a tape measure will last for 5 hours. So I actually have quite a selection at my shop for that purpose. But anyway, that's measuring. And so now I'm just going to take a little quick cut. My hand's out of the way. I'm going to just adjust it a little bit longer. Okay, so out of that 10-footer, we've just taken 2 end cuts. All right, now we're going to label them. It's the first thing you do after you cut. You always label your pieces. Usually I like to do it on the end grain, probably not on the sides. If you do it on the end grain, sometimes you don't have to sand it off, especially if we're cutting it off on with using our jig or our pattern or fixture. I don't know what it's called exactly, but anyway, so we're going to label that on the ends. We'll label off the side, so if we are able to cut it off, we will. Actually, this is a factory end. Factory end isn't as good as we can make, so I'm going to mark it on that end. This is letter A. Sometimes I'll put a line underneath it. If you notice when you're playing like a game of pool, I don't know how many people have pool tables, but the 6 and the 9, I think the 6 has a line underneath it, and sometimes the 9 too, but it differentiates between the 6 and a 9 when you put a line underneath it. So that's the same thing. I put an A, and sometimes my A's look like a B or a D. It's like a D if I get the tail a little long or something. And so you have to be a little careful about how you label things so you don't get confused, because if your labeling is wrong, nothing will work out the way you want it to. So I usually put a line underneath it. So that's our letter A's. Now our letter B's should be made out of an 8-foot piece. So I'm going to put this piece away and then go get an 8-footer. Now if I was doing this mass production, I would just be, I'd do all of them. I'd have a stop set up, and I would just take care of all of them. But today we're just making one for so that you can see how to do it. So we're going to put B on the saw. All right. Sometimes I will. I know this is going to be real tight, so I'm really not taking much stock off the ends. But typically, I would clean this end cut off just a little bit. Because a lot of times they have printing and different things on the end grain, and I don't like it. So I would typically just take a little tiny cut off there. Like say, it's probably, I'm going to only take a 32nd. Just a tiny one. And didn't take much off, so it'll just have to be sanded because I'm trying to get as little drop as possible. You know, if we think back to what our size was for the letter B's, we need 2 of them at 19 and 1/16. So I'm going to cut it off at 19 and 1/16. We have to have 2 identical sizes, or 2 pieces that way. So let's go ahead and cut it off at 19 and 1/16, making sure that this time we can go ahead and cut it exactly the same length. Okay. All right, there's one piece. Now a little trick I use, if your fence is tall enough, this will work. And this fence will be tall enough. You just line the pieces one up on top of the other. And then when you bring the blade down a little bit, you can bring it down until it just touches it barely. You should feel next to no resistance on this top piece. I think you probably see where I'm going with this. If you do it this way, then the 2 pieces will be absolutely identical in size. And that's really what the most critical thing is. You just want to have your pieces be just really close to the right size, or the same size. So again, I've got my hand at least 3 inches away from the blade. I'm actually going to hold it like this time, so I'm going to push down and back towards the fence. There you have it. So we have 2 identical sized B's. So again, we have the paint on this end. We're not going to get rid of it this time, but I'm just going to label this B right here. Underline it, and done deal. So our letter B's are done. And as you do this, you should actually be checking it off on the board. We've done our letter A's, so then I usually over the quantity, not over the letter. The quantity, you want to do 2. I'll say we had 36, and I made my first 4. So if it was in the quantity, I'll do it down here. So it's 36, but I've done 4. So then what I would do is cross that out, subtract 4 from 6, and put a 32 here. So the number that's not crossed out is the number you have left. And every time you do some, it helps you just bring the quantity down and keep track of where you're at. because sometimes when I'm building panels and stuff for like raised panel doors in my shop, again, it's about helping me remember what I'm doing. And so I'll jump from like a letter E to a letter C, and then maybe I have a little left over, so I'll make a D out of it. So I'll keep track of the pieces by just doing this kind of thing under each quantity, and it could be inches. So say I needed 36 inches in width, but I've cut a board that's 4 inches wide. I know I can get 4 inches out of it, so then I'll just reduce it by 4 inches, and this is my new width. So it's not only for quantity, it's about sizing. So anyway, there's several ways to use that tactic, and as long as you use it wisely, it's going to help you do much better. So anyway, get rid of that so we don't get confused what that is. And we'll go back to cutting. Our letter B's in our cut list, we're supposed to use an 8-footer. And so this was an 8-foot piece of stock. Now I'm going to cut a lid off out of the same piece of stock. Again, they're both, the lids and the sides are going to be made out of 8-foot stock. So it's perfectly legal to do that kind of thing. And the stock sizes are going to be, they're almost identical. So the lid size should be 18 and 15/16. So we'll go 18 and 15/16. I'll make a mark right in the center. Okay, I got it. And I'll just make a cut. Now see how my stock is not supported? But I've got the whole stock support on the saw itself. So it is being supported, just it's not a little support that came with this. I think I've bent it over time. You're supposed to replace worn parts, but it's one of those things that I just haven't done yet. I'm just going to try tightening it up, and hopefully it'll work out good enough. Well, it will work out good enough, but see, it allows it to kind of jiggle around, and it's not the greatest, but it's going to have to work. So again, I'm going to make a little bit of a cut. I have my fingers underneath on my left hand on a piece of the saw, and I'm feeling it as it moves a little bit. So I'm actually adjusting it left and right on the saw, and it's so little you guys probably can't see it. So I get it close. Okay. Sometimes it's wise to not lift the saw out of the stock right away. One case would be, so say you had a stop set up over here on the right side. It could bind between the saw and the stop. So that's when you want to just bring it down and let the saw stop inside the stock, and then it'll actually, because it's binding, it'll actually lift the stock up a little bit, and that's what you're avoiding. So after the blade is stopped, if it lifts it up, well, it doesn't hurt anything. But if you have the saw blade spinning, doing that, it lifts it up beyond the fence, and it'll kick the stock back. Okay? So the best way to do it, as I'm going, I'm teaching, so hopefully you're picking this all up. This is really quite important. So you want to keep, when you've got a stop set up on one end or the other of the stock, you want to let the blade stop. So it's stopped, so you cut through the part, the blade is stopped, then you lift it out of the stock. Okay? That way you'll avoid a kickback or ruining something on your fence, or if there's something behind, that's where it's going to kick it back. It's going to throw the stock, and I've had that happen, and it's extremely scary. One time I actually broke the whole fence off my saw. It actually cracked the whole casting, just for a simple little error, and it cost me about $80 plus my time to repair it. Everybody makes mistakes, but it's minimizing the mistakes. We always got to minimize them if we can. When you have a drill with a small drill bit in it, or a big drill for that matter, the best thing is not to leave them standing up on the battery like you'd like to, because it's easier to grab that way. You want to lay them down, and that minimizes the risk of it falling onto somebody, falling off a table, and it'll also save the drill bit. Notice I said that saving the drill bit is the last thing. It's a thing. We can throw away a thing and get a new thing, but we can't not go to the hospital. If a drill bit falls, or a drill falls with a drill bit and it goes through your foot, you're going to the hospital to get stitches and shots and stuff. That's not pleasant. Where if you just lay it down, you'll slide it across the table, a little bit or something, you may knock it off the table, but you never ever use your foot or anything to try to stop the tool. And hopefully there's nobody standing around where they're close enough to you where it's going to fall on them. You really shouldn't be that close when you're in the shop anyway, unless you're working together on something. But again, you shouldn't be that close. So let the tool drop. It's okay. We can replace it. Can't replace a foot, can't replace stuff like that. The tool comes loose, if it starts falling off something or it becomes disconnected somehow due to vibration, which happens. That's why you want to keep your tools in good shape. You want to make sure that you repair them right away. So we got our lid. So now we're going to go mark it off on our list again. So this is letter C. So letter C. This time you can use a piece of tape where you mark it really lightly somewhere so that when you sand it, it'll just kind of go away. So I'm going to mark it really light this time. So letter C. And I didn't hardly push at it. And then the other thing you can do is erase it. That way there's less to sand. And if you sand a piece of stock, a lot of times it'll drive the lead into the pores of the wood. So just mark it as light as you can and put a line underneath it. All right, now we have a dowel rod. I do have a drop from the one I already made here. I actually bought a little extra stock when I did all this. So I had enough to make 44. So we don't have a lot of extra stock, obviously, for all this. I think there's a little bit, but not much. So I have the drop left over, and everybody knows what a drop is, right? And we're going to cut this off at 20 inches. So same thing with this one. Measure up 20 inches. We want to cut to the center of the mark. Dowel rod likes to move around. So again, I actually like to tilt the blade so see how it's way up on one side and down on the other. That's the way I like to mark. I like to actually push the blade down so I can get a mark right on the, it should be right centered on the mark. I actually keep track of which part of the mark, so if it's a little right or left, I actually will cut accordingly because I'm kind of picky on this stuff. But anyway, this is all stuff that you can do. So let's see here. This time I had the, you notice I had my thumb, but it was lined up with my hand, and it was way off the thing. So it wasn't sticking out, it was like this. But it's not sticking out enough to make a difference. It's almost like going like this. Your thumb can be sticking out a little bit, but it's not going to be far enough to make a difference, especially if you're 8-10 inches away from the blade. It's just a good habit to have your hand. The other way I could have done it is just curled up my knuckles and hold it in like this, and my thumb is really even with it then. And the better way to probably do it is like this, and holding it in and using, you don't have to use the bottom of your hand. You can use this part up here. I've gotten slivers in the tops of my fingers before, and it's like, how do you get a sliver in the top of your finger? Trying to hold the stock right. So this is the drop, and I might save a few of those to see if the music teacher might want some, but they can whack them together or do something, make some music with them. They do make kind of a cool sound. She might like that, I don't know, we'll see. But anyway, we're ready to check this one off. And then we have our plywood. Now we've cut, Mr. Schmidt and I have cut that plywood already. The interesting thing is it's not the same size as this. So I'm going to leave it as it is right now. And if it's not the right size, we'll have to cut a little bit off. And it's big, so that's always a good thing. Oh, I forgot to label this, didn't I? This is letter D. I'm going to label that. We're safe so it doesn't roll off the bench. And right now our bottoms, it's 1/4 inch material. And it's actually reading 6 9/16. It's a lot bigger than that. So I don't know why it worked on this one, or maybe I made a correction, but if I need to, and didn't write it down on a piece of paper, but so what I may have to do is I may have to trim this so that it'll fit on the box properly. And it seems to me I may have done that. So that one is not the same. 1911/16, actually that one's dead on. So it'll all work out just good for all that. So it's just this one dimension on this board. So I'll do a dry fit on the box before I actually assemble it. And if I find out that it's wrong, then I'll just go through and cut them all off. For this application, usually you want to buy the best tool you can afford. I don't know where these came from or what they are actually. It says do it, so it's probably from a hardware store. Like, I don't know what hardware store would have the do it thing, but I also got a couple of cheap sets from Menards, figuring that, well, tools don't always last forever anyway, and bringing really good ones up here. Like a Malco, I think they're called. They're made down in Annandale. Malco makes some of the best tin snips in the world. Well, that's my thinking anyway, because they're made right here in America, and there are probably some of your neighbors working over at Malco. So if I was you, I'd probably, if you can afford a Malco set, they have left and right-handed ones. So see how the jaw is on one side and the other? Well, what happens is when you're cutting tin, it'll make the other piece curl in the opposite direction. So it would curl on this side. Because you're using the top jaw is the one you usually put on your line. So, and it doesn't matter which way you flip it, it's always going to be the same way. But what they do is they make a left-handed set and a right-handed set. So tin snips, every tool has its nuances, and if you keep track of which is which, they'll have the jaws on the opposite side. So this would actually be on, this jaw would be on the other side, and this one would be the other one, and so it'd curl the other way. And if you're cutting tin and you're doing it all day long, those guys all have at least one left-handed one and one right-handed one. That way the curl runs in the opposite direction. And if you're doing it for a living, you want to have the right tool for the job, because otherwise the curl can come up and hit you in the knuckle, or you struggle to make the cut. And time is where it's at in the heating field where they do a lot of tin snipping. And so you just got to make time. That's the best way to do it, is just have the right tool for the job. So, oops, I marked myself. Anyway, we want to make this one according to our cut list at 18 inches. Now you'll notice that the holes are on 2-inch intervals, and at the end right here, it's a 1 inch right here. Okay, and I think I talked about this earlier on a different video, but what you want to do is you always want to be between the holes. So I wouldn't want to cut where the holes are, or even off that even one mark. If you can cut to the whole inch, it's always the best way to do it. It gives you the best strength on your hinge, and it's just, you know, it looks prettier, I guess, too. So I take a magic marker, because marking on metal with a pencil is really hard. Now what I'm doing is I'm just selecting the right joint, which is this joint right here. So I'll just make a little tiny mark like that. And then usually I run over, I'll use this kind of square. They call them, there's a lot of names for these, I guess. I don't know. I call mine a framing square, but this isn't really a framing square. It's just a triangle. They come in varying qualities as well. But, you want to put that framing square so that this, see how this, it's got like a T on it? So typically you'd run this up against a piece of wood and then you'd mark across that edge. So we're going to do it the opposite way. We're going to put it at that joint. We're going to rest it against the barrel of the hinge. This is called the barrel, or the rib. So you put that against that, and I'm just going to slide it over until it comes up, and I'll have this nice flat surface to draw on right here. So you bring that up there and make your mark nice and straight. And then do the same thing on the other side. And there's our mark. You notice I didn't mark across there because I know exactly where it is, because we got that nice little slit there. So anyway, ready to cut that. Then there's a really tough piece of wire inside here that it pivots around. Usually you have to use a wire cutter on that. And so I'm going to have to run over and get a wire cutter after I snip this. So if you can put it on a flat surface like this is the best way to do it. That way it's actually holding the hinge in place while you're cutting, it won't fall. You don't want to bend the hinge. So then you go ahead and snip that off right there to the joint. And you have to use some force on that, because it's metal's very, very tough. Put the top jowl, line it up with the line, and then you just snip it off like a scissors. And line it up all just pretty. Now the line has thickness. I am picky. So anyway, see the line has thickness. So, and I know it's square to the edge. So I'm actually, when I put this on there, if I go like, let's see if I can stand it up. So if I was to line it up and see how I can start over here, and I'm on one side of the mark and then it goes to the other side of the mark. What you want to do is line it up so the mark looks uniform all the way across. And you want to have it lined up on that split right there in the hinge. Okay? So that's what I'm doing here. So if I was my old instructor, I'd be grading on that, but I'm a lot nicer than he was. So. But he taught us all this stuff, and so, you know, this isn't stuff that I'm just kind of making up on my own. It's, a lot of the stuff I've been shown how to do. There are things I come up with on my own based on what I've been taught in the past. So hopefully when you come out of my class, you'll be pretty smart about how to do stuff like this. Now I'm going to go over and see if I can find a wire cutter. Anyway, there's all sorts of different types of wire cutters. I really like these, especially for this application, because the cutting force is all horizontal to your hand, whereas like a side cutter is more like a tin snips, where it cuts in front. See, so the cutting edge on this runs this way, the cutting edge runs like this on this one. And so if I put it on the end like this, just right on the edge, I'm going to get the same cutting force as I do over on this edge, all across that whole surface. Whereas with this one, if I try to cut, especially on this, how do I cut something like that with a normal wire, a side cutter? You're cutting way at the tip, and I can't get near as much force on that. It's going to take a lot more hand fatigue. So this is a far better wire cutting plier than a normal side cutter would be. And just as an example, this is called a needle nose, and that's why they call it. It's just a very thin plier, comes right out to the tip like that. I carry one of these on my side all the time. I've always got a needle nose with me, but on it it's also got a little wire cutter. So what people used to use them for is electrical stuff. I know a lot of people use like a 9s, I think they're called, and it's a super heavy duty pair of wire cutters, but they got a big square pad on the front. I don't have an example of that here at the school, but what they used to use these for is, so you cut the wire off with this right here, and then you could take the wire and curl it around, and then you'd screw that into your outlet. And maybe next year, if I get lucky, I'm going to have a wall built, and then we're all going to go through a very basic wiring situation in the wall, so you can kind of know how to replace an outlet. So I'm going to cut this off now, if I can. Sometimes it'll come apart a little bit, so I'm not cutting tin too. And toto too. I don't know where that came in my mind. Yeah, I'm going to turn this around. So now I want to just cut the wire in there. I'm going to cut it. That was actually not bad. That went real good. Now there's one last thing to do on these. You can sand these edges a little bit and make sure that, see how it curled up when I cut it? See how it's a little bent there? You can just hit that a little bit with a hammer and knock it back into shape. But we need to peen the ends so that this wire won't fall out. And usually if I have a concrete floor, I just lightly hit it on there and it just peens this end over and holds the wire so it can't move. So I'm going to do that quick, and then I'll be right with you here. I'll just gotta run over and grab my hammer. You want to use a metal hammer, not a mallet. If you use a metal hammer, metal on metal, and wood is optional. Sometimes you just got to choose the best hammer. So I'm just going to flatten this out. And you can use a plier to flatten it out, but it looks much better already. It's just the cutting force and the way it goes on it. So now it's nice and flat. Now I'm going to go on the floor right here and just peen those ends. And I'll probably have that on the quiz too, the word peen. P-E-E-N, peen. Now you can see my bald head too. So anyway, you just come to the end and just lightly peen it. All it does is put a tiny little bend in the end, and it holds the hinge pin in place. I'll show you. I'll hold it up so you can probably get a shot. You see how it's just lightly peened? You can see where it's a little flat there. You need to do that so otherwise that pin can actually work. As you open and close the hinge, the pin can come out. And it just puts a little force on, or a little detent on it, so it'll keep it from falling out. So anyway, I think that's the majority of our pieces. We're ready to start formalizing our cuts. Going to cross our pieces off. So Mr. Schmidt and I have already cut the bottoms out, all of them. So we'll just mark that off. And so like I was saying, this piece may need to be recut, but that's fine. If I have to cut one, I'll cut them all. So I'd rather have them big than small. That kind of rhymes. I can't even repeat it, but what was it? I'd rather cut them long rather than cut them small. I don't know if it rhymes or not, but anyway, piano hinge, 18 inches long. So we just cut that. So now we have all our pieces. So now we're going to go through building this, I guess you'd call it a template. It's a router jig. That's what it really is. So it's probably a little of everything. So anyway, we're going to use our template to cut the end pieces, letter A. That's the part that looks like this for the end of the toolbox. I also put marks in here for screw locations. And I even drew in where the end pieces are going to be. Actually, I could probably measure that. That would tell me whether my pieces are accurate or not. So that's 6.5, less than 1/8, so it would be 6 3/8. What did I say it was supposed to be? 6 3/8. Yeah, we're going to be cutting that off, most likely. But this shows the letter B's right here with a dashed line. So all it is I just took a square, a carpenter square, and a compass to make the radiuses. There's no big secret. Sometimes I'll even use like a spray paint can for different things, as long as it's a consistent radius and it doesn't matter that the radius is what size it is. It's just for looks. A lot of times I'll do that. I wanted to make it a little bit wider here so that it would be a little stronger towards the bottom. So that's why I made it so it tapered here. And it also adds like a little bit of, I don't know, a nice little feature to it, just to make it look a little bit more artistic. I always like to, if there's a way to make something look pretty, people are more likely to like it. And I like to have people like what I build. But the whole idea is that I drew the whole thing out, and you can see all the different dimensions on there. There's a center line coming down the whole thing. And again, this is woodworking. I noticed when I was doing it that if you flip the wood piece over, that it's not quite aligned perfectly. It won't matter. It doesn't matter a lick. It's only off like a 1/16th, and so in the grand scheme of things, it's going to work out just fine. So anyway, well, let's find our letter A's. That's our end pieces. They should be clearly labeled. Well, clearly, it's my handwriting, so it's not always real clear, but I can read that that's an A, and I know that this one's an A. And let's use this one first, because this is actually the factory end here. So we can cut off some of that factory end. I would prefer to do that because it's kind of rough. We're going to put that in our pattern. Now, when you punch these holes with our punch, what that's going to do is that says that's the outside of this piece. So that's something to keep in mind. If there is a huge scratch or a piece of grain that you really don't like, you want to put it on the inside. Like, I wouldn't mind having this knot on the inside. It's solid here, but by the time it gets to this side, it's not. I'd rather have that, not that may fall out over 10, 20 years, I'd rather have that towards the inside of the box. That way it won't have any influence on the outside. So if you paint the outside of the box, the knot's going to still be there. It's just that this part might fall out. So anyway, so I'm going to make this the outside. That's where I'm going to punch these holes. And it worked. So you see at the very top here, I'm going to be able to get a pencil mark on there, and I'll be able to cut that off. So I'm kind of centering this up. I'm going to make my mark. What we're going to do is we're going to use the bandsaw to cut this off. It's called paring, P-A-R-E-I-N-G, paring. You're paring off the side of something. It's like you use a paring knife to peel an apple. You're going to take something off with it. So you're going to pare that off. It's not P-A-I-R. That's a pair. That's two of something. You know, it's like a couple pair. So anyway, and then this side, I like the color of the knot. So it's just a small little feature. So I like the color of this knot better than I like this one. This one's darker again. So I think in this situation I want this to the outside again. So I'm going to put the outside up. Know if I'm making a lead line on it that's going to be the side. So I'm going to do that. There we go. So I got them both marked, and now I'm ready to use the bandsaw to take these edges off. When I come back, I'll use my my punch, and I'll punch the locations of all these holes. This one up here on top is actually for the handle. That'll be on the inside. Just thought of that. So we have the outside holes and we have the inside, so we might have to rearrange that thinking a little bit. But for now, we'll just go ahead and get that material cut off. So the bandsaw was set up for cutting plugs from last time. So now we're going to take apart that setup, and we're going to reset up to build or to pare off these excess pieces of stock here. So if you're going to take like the fence off, that's just fine. These things are made to take on and off. You pull the fence off. Make sure you have a good hold of it. You don't ever want to drop. It's like a measuring tool. You just don't. There's some things you just can't drop, and a fence is one of those things. They can be bent or broken, and then it costs you money to fix stuff. So you put it up somewhere out of the way, nice and safe. You know it won't fall. Try to get all the hanging pieces where somebody could rub up against it and knock it off. Just make sure it's clear out of the way. Now we got to adjust the blade guard up and down. So you bring this down until it's roughly an 1/8 inch above the stock. That's actually a little too close. There's a little round piece underneath here that comes down a little bit further. So right now it's only about a 1/16 off, which is great. You know, really hard to hurt yourself doing it that way. I'm going to start up the saw and get these cut. And you want to cut them big. So I'll show you after I'm done cutting, but I'm going to leave about 1/16 to an 1/8 inch all the way around this cut. We're actually going to bring it down to size using that router template. So here we go. Cutting, you always avoid putting your hand in line with the blade when you're pushing the stock through. It's another safety protocol that you really need to follow. You'll see I'm switching back and forth so I don't get myself lined up with the blade. Remove the debris. If you remove it safely from the back side, it's okay, but you should never be removing debris from the front. I always have a stick around, and you just remove debris from the front with a stick while the machine is operating. If the machine is off and totally stopped, it's okay to remove it with your hand, but otherwise use a stick. That is critical. More people get hurt by doing two things. They get in a hurry and they try to remove the stock from near a blade. You should never ever do that. With your hand. You can't remove it with a stick. Stick gets cut, it's not a potential piece of wood. It's what it's there for. As I make my radius, I keep moving the stock through the material. If you just try to just stop and turn, blades don't like that. So when you're cutting, like a radius, you want to move it through the stock. You got to keep cutting and pushing it through. And I'm going to remove that. I have my sleeves rolled up. It's not a drill press, but it's a good idea to always have your sleeves rolled up. If you haven't grabbed the other piece, we'll do that one. Okay, cutting this one off, carrying it. They are now paired off, but see now how I got, well, it's between the 16th and the 8th left over. Now we're going to use a router, and it's called a follower bit on the router stand. Most of you have already touched the router stand. I'm a little allergic to the dust here. So anyway, we're going to bring this right down to the profile now, and we're going to have all the punches in there, so all we have to do is come back and cut them. And there is a tactic for getting the holes punched on the right side that I will use. So I'll show you what all that is in a little bit. So anyway, moving on. Okay, we're going to screw this onto our piece of stock now. And then we're going to punch it. And then we're going to set up on the router. So then see how I'm pushing down on it with this hand? I'm going to drill the screw in with the other. I wanted to also say something about pattern degradation. When you have a CNC, which uses all numbers to program a shape like this, the program doesn't degrade. And that's why you can take it, but every time it cuts it, it's cutting the same exact profile. All I have to do is change out cutters and stuff. But this pattern will degrade. And so what that means is over time, the bearing rubbing on this surface and different things, it'll wear out slowly, but it will wear out. And so then when I recreate this, it may not be the same, but it's just part of aging, I guess. We all degrade in some way, but the patterns will degrade. And I've been laying stuff out on wood for years and years and years, so for me it's just secondhand. So now I'm going to use this, and like I say, I have a follower bit. I'm going to show it to you in just a moment, and we're going to set up the router. We're going to cut these profiles. So when I'm done with this one, then I'll be able to take it out and put the other side in and just do it again. So let me just grab the punch. I would like to punch these before I forget them. Let's see here. We are looking for a 3/8 transfer punch. And we have a hammer. If I had a hammer. Oh my, it's getting to be that time of day already, huh? Alright, so now I put it into the hole. I spin it just lightly, and I hit it. Same thing. Always spin it, that way it finds the bottom of the hole real easy, and you know it's accurate. So I'm punching, punching, punching. And pine is a lot harder than basswood, can about look at that little dent. And again, I usually take my pencil so it's easy to identify, and I'll just, in the bottom of the hole, I like to put a little bit of a mark. It's easier to find that way. Okay, done deal. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that out. The router should be unplugged while you're setting it up. There's several reasons for that. If you're working on a cutter or something, you don't want to have somebody start it up and your fingers are next to the cutters and you end up cutting stuff off, or hurting yourself, cutting yourself, whatever. So we want to avoid that. So the first thing we're doing is we're going to move the fence back. We've already been through the majority of this, so you guys all probably pretty well know your way around this router stand because I've had pretty much everybody do some stuff on it. If you have a brush or a vacuum, that's another good way to clean this thing off. I did use a small router bit in here. It's a 1/4 round over, and so I put this extra little insert in here. The only problem with it is it's really hard to get out. So I'm going to try to just reach underneath here and just pop it out. And of course it won't come. So I'm going to have to, I'm going to bring the router bit down under the surface, then I'm going to use a screwdriver or something to pop it loose. I'll just take a second here. Okay, maybe be able to use the handle of one of these wrenches to pop it loose. And there it comes. You always want to use the smallest insert as possible for the router bit. Most router bits aren't going to let you use this, but a lot of them will. So you just have to use that as much as possible. It keeps the stock from diving into the hole and kicking back, which is, kickbacks are a bummer. So we want to get that motor head even with the bottom. Okay, there it is. I went way up and then I had to come back down again. You don't do something every day, you kind of forget how to do stuff. You have to remember. Okay, that looks good. Remember the whole thing where tightening and loosening, where one wrench is, if you're tightening, you want to have it like this. If you loosen it, then you want to go like that. And then you can just use one hand, you won't knuckle bust. See, that's tightening. This is loosening. So I've loosened it up on the first notch, spinning it up to the snap ring. Now I'm going to loosen it up for the second one. There that goes. Now it's loose. So this is a half-inch shank with a 1/4 round over. Right? You could put a fingernail. You just drop it down a little bit further. It's called a fingernail, kind of like the end where your fingernail is here. So same difference. You can make a little fingernail on things, and sometimes that's a little decorative thing. So I put it right back in its holder. Usually you do that, you bring the holder over here so you never have it in the spot where you can drop it. So I made a little boo-boo there. But anyway, then you put this cap back on. So now if I drop it, it's still going to be safe. It's still in the holder. I'm kind of lucky again, like I said, this has got a 1/2-inch shank. So it'll go right back in the same collet. Remember what a collet looks like? That's what a collet looks like. The only thing instead of a 1/4 inch, it's a 1/2-inch hole. We'll keep the collets right here. Now I'm going to place that inside the holder for the collet. Usually I like to hold the bottom of the bit to the top of the collet about a 1/2 inch up. Now if it's a 1/4 inch bit, I'd probably want to be about a 1/4 inch. You can technically have it way down here, so a 1/2 inch collet means you have a 1/2 inch on there onto the shank, but in my opinion that's only for rare things, and you better know what you're doing because you could break the bit off or ruin your collet. So the more you can get in the collet, usually the better. But my rule of thumb is I like to have it about one diameter up away from the collet. I'm just tightening using the one hand method. So you have it like this, that's tightening. If you have it like this, that's loosening. The idea is you can have it both on the same nut. Okay, and you just pinch it like that, whereas if you hold both wrenches and you're trying to loosen, you can slip and then your knuckles hit it, and it's called a knuckle buster. And those hurt, so avoid pain whenever possible. Okay, I'll look at using this little insert again. That can easily fit over there, and it's nice to have that little extra protection. What will happen is, you know, say you have a little scrawny piece of material you're running through. If you have this big insert, it can fit right inside there. Now you put this here, and it can suck you in and do all sorts of stuff. It can whack your hand. So by putting this insert in, no, I typically don't say you should do this, but sometimes you just got to get these inserts in, and they pop in really, really hard. But then they come out hard, which is what you want. You don't want them to come out loosely. Anyway, so then you see you can't get it in there anymore. So that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to make it as safe as possible so that you can't have that piece of wood drop inside there. It also creates more speed for your vacuum system. So my vacuum table at home has suction down below and up above it, and it serves a couple of purposes. It removes chips and it takes away heat, because I'm sucking cool fresh air around the motor of the router and the router bit. And it keeps the bit cooler and it keeps the motor cooler. The one at home will actually overheat, the router will, and so I end up having to let that cool down sometimes. It's got a little reset button on it, but if I have the vacuum cleaner or the vac going on it, hardly ever happens. Okay, now we're going to set the height. So I want this bearing here, that's going to ride right on this pattern, okay? And so you can see right now that's way below where it should be. So I'm just going to raise that up a little bit, there, where it needs to be. And I want the carbide to actually make it's right on the surface. So I should cut the whole surface now, and that's what we're after. So I'm going to tighten this down. And it's time to plug in the router. We're almost ready to get started here. The thing is, we'll make a couple cuts and we'll be done. You know, usually I would set something like this up, and when you got 40 of them to do, that means you're doing 80. So once you set up, then you just keep running the same operation. So we're just taking you through one to kind of take you through the whole construction of the thing. So, ear protection when we're running routers and vacuums and stuff makes a bunch of racket, so you want to use hearing protection. And so it's going to make a whole bunch of noise here real soon. I think we're ready to cut. Probably open this up a little bit, the fence, and maybe move it up a little closer. That way we'll suck the debris better. Whenever you can get the debris out of the way, that's a plus. And I'm just adjusting in so that I know that the routers will come in complete contact with the pattern, so that I know I'm cutting full depth. So, all right, I think I'm ready to get started. I'll turn on the router and the vacuum, and we'll get underway here. Okay, when you're done, you can unplug it for the next guy. And now it's created a really nice smooth. It's a brand new cutter. It's sharp, sharp, and they love to cut pine. These surfaces are so pretty and smooth. They just love it. So we're gonna just take this piece out, our work piece, out of the pattern. Take that out. When you drive the screws in, you definitely don't want to drive them in too far because that'll make the work piece or the pattern degrade quicker. So you don't want to overdrive the screws and drive the heads in past. You just want to bring them up till they're snug. And typically I would use a piece of oak for this piece because it's going to take a lot of wear. But all I had here was pine, so I didn't use oak this time. But then it just comes out. Oh, this one I forgot to put the little black dots in the bottom of the hole. Okay, so that's that. We're now going to set up on the drill press.